Unorthodox.
RPGNet has unilaterally banned supporting or even remotely positive discussion or the raising of topics surrounding Donald Trump. Now, I don't like Trump. Unfortunately, this kind of disclaimer is necessary, as I've said before. To cut a long story short, Orange Man bad. But if we're going to be discussing RPGNet, I should slip into something more appropriate.
RPGNet is a forum. Remember forums? Those are the things people used after Usenet, but before social media really took off. And RPGNet was one of the biggest and most influential forums out there. I don't know whether it still is. Me and RPGNet have a fairly storied history.
I used to post there quite a bit. Everyone did. If you were involved in RPGs and you were active online at all, then RPGNet was pretty much the place to be. Other designers would post there. Artists that wanted to work on games, freelance writers and editors and so on. It was like the hub for the RPG industry. And back in the early days, it was much more of a kind of rough and tumble place, much like the rest of the internet was. You could get into heated, interesting discussions about things that mattered to you around games. And that was a great and a good thing. You know, you could hold designers to task about projects and so on. All in all, it was a pretty good experience. And back in the early days, I found it to be so. Even early on, the moderation was a bit iffy and cliquey and not exactly fair, but by and large, things rumbled along fairly well. At some point, that culture began to change. The tangency board, which is where everything non-RPG related began to explode and take over. I'm not sure exactly when Skotos took over. They run kind of online mud things, you know, paid subscription service, text-play RPGs. At some point they took over. I don't know exactly how that relates to it going to pot, but the culture on the site began to change. In much the same way indie music became a particular genre in and of itself, rather than being just independent, off-main label music, so indie RPGs kind of took off very much via RPGNet and took on a culture of their own. It became the kind of proto-social justice warrior clique within gaming. And keep in mind that this hurt the RPG industry earlier than everything else. It was very much the canary in the coal mine for what would happen. I guess my first inkling that something was really going wrong would have been around 2007. Now, bear in mind, most people assign the rise of the new political correctness as happening between 2010 and 2012. So you can see that we had a kind of lead-in of problems here, starting much earlier. Now, around that time, I first published Hentacle, which was a hentai tentacle card game that was actually rather graphic, unlike Tentacle Bento. And I'd recruited the artist from RPGNet, in the previous year, I suppose it must have been, and there was barely a peep at the time. I mean, this was a place where people would discuss these kind of things in the off-topic section, and there were plenty of anime fans, hentai fans. It was a much broader, more open and diverse, ironically, community at the time. So Hentacle came out, and for a while not much. It was a very successful product for me. at the kind of scale that I work. Probably my most successful thing other than the Adventure Seeds books or Munchkin. So yeah, it came out, and then there was a reaction amongst certain quarters that I hadn't expected or anticipated, and found very peculiar indeed. The artist that had worked for me came under a lot of pressure and abuse, and comments started appearing which probably seem tame now, or to be expected now, but at the time were kind of crazy, especially as they were coming from the left-hand side of the political spectrum, the liberal side of the political spectrum, the kinds of people who had railed against right-wing censorship and moralising for so long, and who had protected tabletop gaming from that element for so long. But I started to get these comments like, oh, this is terrible, this is fetishised child rape, and all kinds of weird accusations. Yeah, they're drawings. What are you talking about? I didn't say what the age of any of the characters were. What? It just made no sense to me. Now, obviously, you know me by now, I'm a contrarian, so when these reactions started, I started poking at them. And I took a bunch of the outlandish negative comments that people had made, and I added them to the product description. So people had said these things publicly about my game, and just as film posters or whatever else, pull quotes about a product from reviews and commentary and so on, and put them up. And bad films, you might see Twitter comments quoted and so on. I took these comments and I put them in the descriptive text for Hentacle, the sales text, because I thought this was so funny and stupid, and it backed up what kind of game it was and exactly why it was tweaking people's nipples in that way. I put that on there. And then my Sales Point drive-through RPG Now began becoming under pressure from Skotos and RPGNet, and I began to get threatening messages from Skotos and RPGNet to take this off, because apparently I wasn't allowed to take things that people have publicly said on a forum and use them to boost the profile of my game, which is odd, and I'm not sure whether that's entirely legal. So that was an inkling of what was going wrong. I wasn't really banned at that point, but obviously the site became less useful, less welcoming. The moderation began to ramp up and become oppressive, and so I stopped using the site quite so much. I made a secondary company account to separate my personal and business identities, and I really only used it for promotion and recruiting after that. It was still fairly good for that at the time. I wasn't banned from the site until the release of the New World of Darkness, the NWOD, the one where they changed everything, where vampires had no reason to be social or to travel or to have Elysia or anything like that at all, and where they turned mage into a screed about theosophy. I did not like the New World of Darkness at all, and I said so vociferously and at length quite a lot. That's why I was banned from RPGNet, for discussing an RPG and not liking a particular RPG, and being descriptive and rather full on in why I didn't like it. And that's what got me banned from RPGNet, discussing an RPG. A little bit odd. My company account during this period was fairly acquiescent. This is about the time I was first diagnosed with depression and was trying to find out what was wrong with me. So I wasn't particularly active for a whole bunch of reasons at the time, but the corporate account remained. It wasn't banned, and just kind of, okay, I was hardly using the site anyway because it had become so unwelcoming and such a shadow of its former self, even back then. But the corporate account remained, and it wasn't just me that used it. There were other people using the account on my behalf, people who worked with me and for me and so on to do promotions and so on, and that was really all it did. So it was a couple of years down the road before using the corporate account I began to get involved in discussions about my work that were occurring on that forum, and that's when that account got banned as well, supposedly for avoiding the ban on my personal account. And the thing about moderation on RPGNet is that arguing with the mods about bad decisions is itself a bannable offence, so there is no mechanism by which you can reasonably appeal. So my corporate account was banned. Anyone who spoke up for me was banned, and I'll tell you a secret about people who are banned from RPGNet. All the best people are. I was actually fairly amused by this. It did have an impact on my business at the time. I don't think it matters so much anymore whether you're on RPGNet or not. I don't think it really matters. RPGNet Darling, a game that really fired people up and made them enthusiastic on the site. Yeah, that used to get you a good chunk of sales. I don't think that's the case so much anymore. So you're not really missing out on much. But again, I was a contrarian. So I made a line of t-shirts through Cafe Press saying banned from RPGNet. Because why not be proud of that if they're going to be such a huge bunch of dicks constantly? And the mod clique there is vindictive. A lot of them are something awful goons, and there's just no way to appeal. So I made these shirts. Guess what happened next? Legal threats towards me. Cafe Press, we've had complaints about this t-shirt and we have to take it down because it's a violation of copyright. It wasn't in any way, shape or form. It's a parody, a satire, a commentary on just how ludicrous the moderation was on that site and how being banned from there was something to be proud of. Much like being blocked by Steve Shives years before that ever happened. So there's the background, I guess, when it started going wrong, how it has continued to go wrong, why the moderation is so utterly biased and wrong-headed. And this is a bit of a deep dive into all that background and so on. I did try and contact Skotos, the company behind it. They have a corporate listing, they have a phone number listed. I called them up on Skype to try and raise some of these issues and the issues with some of the moderators who were very, very biased and, fairly nasty people. And while he answered the call, it wouldn't listen, just laughed and hung up. Desperately unprofessional, if you ask me. But if you've got a problem with goons and moderators who are trolls, like Etin, surely a professional company would look into that and deal with the issue. But no, the mod clique looks after its own. So I guess you could say it's not surprising to me at all that they have banned anyone from discussing Trump in a positive light. And remember, I'm very, very left-wing, and I think Trump is a buffoon, an idiot. I think if there's anything positive to be said about Trump, it's that he's so inept and obvious in his corruption that everyone can now see how the sausage is made, and as a result of Trump, a backlash might well get you some reform in the United States. Again, unfortunately, I have to say this because otherwise people will say I'm a filthy centrist or support Trump or whatever myself. I don't, but I believe you have the right to support Trump. I believe you have the right to explain and discuss why you support his policies. Nobody is at threat from discussion on a forum. Nobody can actually be harmed by that, and you have the tools at your disposal to block or ignore people whose ideas you find offensive, for whatever reason. You can wipe them out of your worldview. That's dangerous in and of itself, but you have that option. Somebody saying I love Trump on an RPG forum or in their signature file or whatever else does you no harm whatsoever. Just like you're listing your pronouns or whatever in your bio or your signature file or whatever else, that doesn't harm the snowflakes on the right either. Often what people put into their signature files or their profiles or their biographies or whatever else it might be can act as a red flag to help you know that you don't want to interact with this person. This is useful. People's ideas are exposed to scrutiny. You can argue and persuade, and the way you get people to drop bad ideas usually isn't one revelatory poning that you serve to them on a forum or wherever else. It's a slow grinding process, giving them time for these ideas to percolate through, for them to experience and encounter other points of view that eventually leads them to revise their opinion themselves. So by banning this kind of discussion, and it is only discussion on that side, you're not helping anything. You're not helping anyone. You're not helping the Trump supporter who you probably think you should re-educate, because you're not giving them the opportunity to discuss and perhaps revise their opinions. You're not helping marginalized groups because you're not acting to persuade the people on the other side in any way. You're not having the debate, you're not having the discussion, you're not forcing them to concede any ground or consider that they might be wrong. Then you can't be harmed by words on a forum. It's just absurd and counterproductive, and will have the opposite effect to the one they think they want it to have. But it's not surprising that this has happened at all, not when you have cliques of moderators who are either trolls themselves, or a lot of moderators end up being the kind of stereotypical woke people, because they want those positions of power so that they can enforce their point of view on others. And the people that are more laissez-faire, more genuinely liberal, don't tend to want positions of authority. So that's how you get the creep. So if you want to discuss role-playing, where can you go? Well, there's the comment section of certain blogs. If you know someone who has a reasonably even-handed or game-focused point of view, Tenkar's Tavern is good for that. Perhaps D&D with Pawn Stars. Zach's blog is fairly good for that. If you want to have those kind of tightly focused discussions on the content of the blog, then there's that. Forums-wise, the RPG site is probably the most old school of the forums, where you can still have a rough and tumble discussion and proper disagreement and so on. But because so much of it is made up of refugees from other sites, much like Gab or Minds, you tend to find the kinds of people that have run afoul of moderation in other places being the primary settlers there. But if lots more people with more varied outlooks settle in that forum, then necessarily the culture will change, at least in terms of discussion topics and so on, without, hopefully, probably not, changing the nature of the moderation and so on, which will hopefully remain open and as much as possible laissez-faire to leave you to sort it out amongst yourselves. EN World, political discussion and so on is kept to an absolute minimum there, but the moderation is almost as bad as RPGNet in terms of how forceful it is. I got a warning for using the term virtue signalling in a post. That's how bad EN World can be. So there's a few other older forums that might still be running, Circus Maximus and a few others. There's Board Game Geek and RPG Geek. Moderation in those places is also a bit of a problem. There's Facebook groups, I suppose, but the trouble with Facebook groups is you often don't get to see that anyone's posted anything in them, and the moderation varies from non-existent to terrible across there, but they're not very good for constant day-to-day interactions. Google Plus did have good RPG discussion and groups on it, but that's going the way of the Dodo, and MeWe just isn't really up there. I would encourage you to join Minds. There isn't enough RPG discussion going on there yet, but that's hopefully something we can change. Look for Role-Playing Minds, that's the group that I run on there. Otherwise, I don't really know. Social media has taken up a lot of the space that these forums and things used to, but with block lists and all kinds of other nonsense and censorship going on there at the moment, and looking like it's continuing to ramp up, there aren't that many good places. If I was going to recommend anywhere, it would be the RPG site and Minds, but forums, they're just not where it's at anymore. They're not down with the kids. I thought it was worth doing something of a deeper dive into RPGNet and the problems with it and just how far back they go, because plenty of people have done reaction videos, but they're not necessarily as in the know or haven't necessarily experienced the problems with RPGNet on the same personal, albeit subjective, basis that I have. So hopefully you found something useful here, and you'll go and check out those other forums. For proper English. Zang.
I can get you anything you want. You just have to talk to me. Talk to me. Talk to me. Talk to me. I'm your priest. I'm your shrink. I'm your main connection to the switchboard of souls. I'm the magic man. The Santa Claus of the subconscious. You say it. You even think it. You can have it.